well known, a matter of the public record, that Trump's decision to go along with Israel's desire for another war with Iran was heavily influenced by a long briefing he got from Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, and that this was one of the key things that tipped his hand to decide for it, in part because he was convinced by this briefing that the Iranian government was fragile, would collapse overnight. This would be a quick war, last 2 or 3 days, which is what he apparently told some of our partners in the Middle East as well. So Israel certainly played a key role. And remember, Israel is fighting the war, or has fought the war along with the United States. I think also if you look at some of the people surrounding Trump, they are also very strongly pro-Israel, pro-Zionist, and they have been an influence. Witkoff, Kushner, and others, Marco Rubio in particular. So this is clearly a war that the United States is fighting very much on behalf of Israel, and it's not in Israel's interest ultimately. It's not in our interest, and it's not in the world's interest. I'll leave it there. There is the other interesting question, though. If you think about countries that are bombing their neighbors around the Middle East, right, including bombing Qatar, an American ally, that would be Israel. And yet somehow we don't think of Israel's behavior as being somehow monstrous, even though it has done certain things in recent years, such as the genocide in Gaza, that I would consider rather monstrous. So again, it gets back to the question of how are we going to define a monster here, and why are we reserving the right to know which is a monster deserving sanction and which is a country that doesn't? Okay.
Victoria, you have worked at the highest levels of U.S. statecraft in the Department of State. Is there an Israel lobby?
And does it have the eye bags to prove it?
And
yes.
Does it have a disproportionate influence over U.S. foreign policy?
Look, I think we have forgotten that we're talking about monsters, and there's no country that is more of an existential monster vis-a-vis Israeli security than Iran, and has proven that again and again and again. We are not in range of Iranian missiles right now or Iranian nukes, but Israel is. I want to go back to the fact that these guys really don't see monsters anywhere. And in fact, with the exception of Iran, they should be very happy guys right now, frankly, with Trump's foreign policy. Because going back to that 2016 piece, which frankly, not only did I read to the end, but I teach my students because I want them to have a realist perspective, understand the realist perspective, and understand both the big flaws in it. But think about this. These guys have recommended that we stay home in our own hemisphere. You now have a Trump national security strategy that focuses only on the Western Hemisphere. You have a U.S. that is withdrawing forces and capabilities from Europe, that is not supporting Ukraine in the way we used to, that is moving aircraft carriers out of Northeast Asia and taking out missile defenses, that's withholding weapons from Taiwan. So they should be thrilled because we are implementing now exactly the policy that they recommended, and let's see if the world ends up safer for it.
John, that's a great answer. Are you thrilled? And do you think that the Israel lobby has a disproportionate influence over U.S. foreign policy?
Well, I just want to say to Toria that we are not advocating that the United States should stay home in the Western Hemisphere. We supported containment against the Soviet Union. We supported the first Gulf War in 1991. We argue that the United States should contain China. I'm fully in favor of giving weapons to Taiwan. And I'm actually one of the few realists who says that I would defend Taiwan if Taiwan was attacked by China.
Good.
So the idea that we're sort of...
I'll tell my students that when we teach the piece.
Yeah. It's in the article.
but no.
In the fine print.
No, to be clear here, the idea that we're shrinking violets, right, who don't believe that the world is a dangerous place and that military force doesn't matter is simply wrong. wrong. We are realists. And by the way, we pay a certain price in academia for that, as you can easily imagine, I'm sure. But I just want to talk about Iran as an existential threat to Israel. I do understand that Israel views Iran as an existential threat, but it's very important to understand that Iran views Israel as an existential threat. And it was Israel that attacked Iran last June, and then the United States came in. And on February 28th of this year, it was Israel and the United States that attacked Iran. And as Steve pointed out, the United States overthrew the Mossadegh government in Iran in 1953. We supported Saddam to include helping him acquire chemical weapons, i.e. weapons of mass destruction, to use against Iran in the Iraq-Iran war. 250,000 Iranians died in that war, an enormous number of people. So I'm just saying to you, you have to be able to put yourself in the feet or in the shoes of the Iranians and understand that from their point of view, Israel is an existential threat. And what I find most amazing, to be honest, is that Iran didn't go out and get nuclear weapons because, as Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, said, it just makes so much sense from their point of view because Israel and the United States are an existential threat to Iran.
Again, we spent 4 years in the Biden administration trying to get Iran to come to the table in a serious way. On the table was having nuclear power, but not nuclear weapons. On the table was relief of sanctions if they would do that, if they would stop their support for terror, including Hamas and including Hezbollah in Lebanon, including the Houthis in the Red Sea. And we got nowhere. And I think Israel got worried about waiting.
Well, if Mike hadn't walked away from the JCPOA, you wouldn't have had to spend all that time getting back into it.
Let's bring
The
Mike in.
JCPOA ended in 24. It was going to need extending anyway.
That's actually a good point. If we hadn't walked away from JCPOA today, they would be free to have nuclear weapons.
Right. It would have ended. It needed to be extended anyway.
And no one could, including the best efforts of Toria, couldn't negotiate because the Iranians said no. So there was an effort to make it better, but the Iranians wanted none of it. Your point, you said you're surprised they didn't have a nuclear weapon. I'm not. They were trying desperately to get a nuclear weapon, slowly, surely, determinedly, and progressing. And the reason they didn't get them is because there was a lot of work done by a lot of really talented, risk-taking people to slow down that program over an awfully long time. Not any one administration, multiple times, and not just America. Great partners. The Canadian Intelligence Service were great partners of mine when I was the CIA director. And so, I'm not surprised. Second, I can't let go. You said Israel committed genocide. So that in my judgment is indecent. It's also factually wrong. And there's a very simple definition of genocide. I declared it once against the Chinese government for enslaving Uyghur Muslims in China. This was seconded by Secretary Blinken, continuing America's position that that was genocide. What the Israelis have done is pure self-defense. And we can argue about some, we can always argue about tactics and decisions. You mentioned Abu Ghraib, that's a disgrace. And we punished the soldiers that did that, and properly so. Mistakes get made, I get that. And the Israelis may well have made some too. I am confident that their military system will respond to that. But the intention here was very clear. And to say that Israel was an existential threat to Iran, I see no evidence in the record of such a thing. Were the Iranians to take their proxy forces from the field, Israel would live its life as the proper Jewish homeland. I'm convinced of that. And then finally, it's worth thinking about this as we talk about monsters. One of these gentlemen said that not only should we not have gone after Assad in Syria, but we should have supported him. He too was killing Americans. He too was sponsoring terrorism in the region and around the world. There's not a Gulf Arab leader that believed Assad was actually the right answer for them. He was an evil monster. Not only did he kill hundreds of thousands of his own, you all would say, that's their problem. That's internal. We ought not even think about that. woe be it unto us to protect human dignity and decency around the world. You would say, no, 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 we must be restrained. Fair enough. But that wasn't the limit of Assad's effort. And so to suggest that we should somehow have supported that monster, I think suggests to you only this. There is no monster that they're actually prepared to hunt. And we could argue about which monsters are which, but I've not yet said, no, that's a monster today on the world stage. Not Al-Qaeda, not ISIS, not Vladimir Putin, not Chairman Kim in North Korea, not Xi Jinping, not Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. There's not a monster today that is roaming the earth that you all believe is worthy of an effort to hunt. And I think that puts Canadians at an awful lot of risk if we went down that path.
Given Mike's list of monsters, we're going to spend the next 2 centuries running around the world trying to promote regime change here, there, and everywhere.
No, I'm not suggesting
and I
any
can
of that.
guarantee you that's not going to have a happy ending.
I'm not suggesting regime change any of those places.
But I want to say just a word on the whole subject of genocide in Gaza. The 3 leading human rights groups in the world, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and B'Tselem, which is a very fine Israeli human rights group, have all done lengthy reports. Yeah. These are thick reports, well documented, that all make the case that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Furthermore, there are a number of Israeli scholars of genocide and the Holocaust who have declared that what is going on in Gaza is a genocide. So I think it is clearly a genocide, and I think not only is Israel committing this, but the United States is complicit in that genocide.
Let me bring Stephen in. He's looking for my eye.
Well, and by the way, if you want to argue about that word, fine, we'll drop the word. Let's just call it mass killing of civilians. Right? Call it mass killing of civilians. That's still a monstrous act. And it was done, bankrolled with American weapons. So something we should have done something to stop, which we didn't.